Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman laid out 7 key priorities in Budget 2023. Inclusive development, infrastructure investments, unleashing potential, green growth, financial sector, youth power and reaching the last mile. Some of the big announcements: increasing capital investment outlay by 33% to 10 lakh crore, continuation of 50-year interest-free loans to state governments, highest ever capital outlay of 2.4 lakh crore for railways, 100 transport infrastructure projects, creating urban infrastructure in Tier 2 and 3 cities. On the fiscal consolidation front, the government is targeting fiscal deficit to be below 4.5% by 25-26. The government made changes to customs duties with the aim of achieving greater domestic manufacturing and higher exports. How do global think tanks and industry chambers view this budget? Will this increase FDI and more China +1 investments into India? We're now joined by Richard Rosso, Senior Advisor and Wadhwani Chair holder in U.S. India Policy Studies at CSIS. Also joining us is Alexander Slater, Managing Director at USIBC. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Rick, if I can begin with you, this was supposed to be a populist budget, an election budget, but do you think this is delivered on all fronts and will attract investments from abroad as well?
Well, it feels to me like it was a fairly conservative budget. You thought that maybe it would be a populist budget appealing to voters with 10 state elections a year away from the national election. But the blowout spending programs that sometimes we've seen from the center or from state governments really weren't there, which is pretty good news. You know, at the same time, it's also a unique opportunity for India to draw in a lot of that investment that's been drawing away from China, you know, trying to secure a greater share of global supply chain investment. There were some elements in the budget that certainly contribute to that. But nothing that seems that it was kind of overridingly focused on those supply chain evolutions there. So it kind of fell in between. No big blowout spending for the elections coming up, but also relatively minor things in terms of trying to lure those investments from overseas. So pretty conservative, and I think most are viewing it as a pretty comfortable budget and one that has a lot of support.
Right, Alexander. When it comes to the capex allocation, we saw a capital investment increase of 33%. The total capital investment would be 10 lakh crores. How do you see this? And do you feel that the implementation of this, the execution, would be key?
Absolutely, Parikshit. It's great to be here. Nice to see you. Rick, good to see you as well. Thanks for having me on. On the question, I think that the capital investment is something that the government sees as a way to make sure that the growth targets that they've laid out are achieved. That, combined with the reforms of the direct taxation regime, are going to help stimulate both investment and consumption, at least public investment and then private consumption. Overall, infrastructure investment is generally something that is a medium-term driver of economic growth and productivity and job creation. I don't know how quickly we'll see this in the actual economy. As you say, it depends on the types of things that it's spent on, when the spending happens, and project execution. But generally, it's a good thing. And I think that it's one way for a government that, for a budget that, as Rick said, is somewhat in between what one might have expected to continue attracting foreign investors. I think the government has said that, or it seems to have taken the position that India, being the fastest growing large economy in the world next year and this year upcoming, is going to be the main attractor of investment. We didn't really see a lot of structural reforms that we'd seen in prior budgets here that foreign investors tend to like as well. Right.
Speaking about structural reforms, Richard, if I can get you in, do you feel that there could have been more that the FM could have done in terms of ease of doing business, easing compliances, easing the indirect tax structure to get more investments, get more manufacturing into India?
Well, a lot of what has to happen are things that happen outside the budget. You know, as Alexander mentioned, as you brought up as well, greater allocation towards developing infrastructure. You also saw what I think are some really important seeds that the government has started to grow or is looking to initiate with expanding resources for courts to begin digitizing. Because again, even though the World Bank is kind of abandoning the doing business report, when you looked at it, one of the areas that India was usually pretty far behind most other countries with which India is competing for investment was remediation through the judicial system. So there's been a lot of great studies and surveys that have been done where that can really be accelerated, and this backload of cases can be drawn down dramatically through better digitization of courts. And one small issue that hasn't been brought up a lot that I really love, that was referenced in the budget speech, was that the finance ministry is going to begin working with municipal governments in India to begin ring fencing resources, helping them develop their own revenue streams. Because ultimately, too, you can't have a national government that's solely in charge of spending everything that's required for infrastructure. In the United States and a lot of other developed countries, you have a robust municipal finance regime, and in India, that's largely lacking. And so if the finance ministry can really put its nose to the grindstone this year, following on an important Reserve Bank of India report a few months ago talking about the state of municipal finances, again, it's long term, as Alec mentioned. A lot of this isn't going to be an immediate pop, but when you start thinking about teeing the government up for the next 5 years in case they win re-election or whatever, some interesting seeds are planting in the budget and in the budget speech.
Right. Alex, coming to you, there were a long list of recommendations that industry chambers, global industry chambers like USIBC had submitted before the finance minister. What, according to you, were some of the misses in the budget, and which, according to you, were critical for the Indian economy this year?
So I think the key thing that foreign investors are looking for out of the investments in India, in addition to the growth number, which I do think the government's efforts will deliver on, are structural reforms that make it a more level playing field for doing business and it easier to do business. Something that wasn't there was an effort to further ease processes for tax dispute resolution. A lot of companies end up operating based on shared services agreements, and there's sometimes disputes with the government about how much a headquarters should be charging a local subsidiary in India about that, and that results in unnecessary tax headaches for companies. And so, we were looking for those changes. I think in the financial sector, making it, putting banks, whatever their origin, on the same footing from a taxation perspective, putting the same thing in place in terms of regulatory frameworks for governance and dividend distributions for insurance companies. These are all things that I think, again, were structural reforms that will help attract foreign investment in these sectors. But I don't think, again, that was what this budget was about. This budget was about delivering on the top line growth number for the year, and that being the selling point in a world where growth is slowing substantially. So foreign investors are going to look around the world and say, what are my options? And I think this government, in advance of an election, didn't want to take on the challenging structural reforms it may have done in prior years. This being said, there is something that we are following very, very closely, a couple of things. The finance minister made a reference to significant reforms in the financial sector that will be taking place with consultation with industry where feasible. We think that this holds a lot of promise. We don't know exactly what she was referring to because there wasn't a lot of detail there, so we're watching it very carefully. I do think that the commitment to consultation with industry, though, is important. We look for transparent, predictable, and consistent consultation with industry to make sure that all stakeholders are represented in the process and that the best policy comes out and we mitigate risks so that there's certainty given to those who are investing in India. Ultimately, I think this is an approach that should be expanded not merely to all sectors beyond the financial sector. So we'll be watching that closely. There are two other things that we're going to be watching closely as well. One is the data governance policy, where we hope that companies doing business in India, whatever their origin, have the same access to that data. If you look at the history of UPI, multinational companies have been integral to the spread of digital payments in the country and the uptake of UPI's usage. And then finally, this National Financial Registry, National Register of Financial Information. Pardon me. We've got to make sure that private companies that hold a lot of this data take part in that, and that the government or that this new structure adequately leverages what they bring to the table so that it delivers a cutting-edge product.
Okay, Rick, coming to you, you had also spoken about the need for lower tariffs on input goods. When we want to play a bigger role in global supply chains, there had been an expectation that inputs coming from China and other countries, the tariffs should be reduced so that India can have a strategic advantage in terms of exports. How do you think the government did when it came to rejigging the customs duties on a range of products?
Well, I mean, if you're in a couple of sectors that were specifically targeted, if you're involved in the fisheries industry or something related to lab-grown diamonds or cell phones or TV panels, you did pretty well, right? You saw some reductions in terms of inputs that are critical for those sectors. Similarly, you still have a strain of I think, protectionism, not as strong in this budget as we've seen in previous years. But if you're in sectors that, for instance, in producing gems and jewelry or electric vehicles, bicycles and toys, you saw customs duty increase. And so kind of making a bet that production of those items, in India is most likely to expand, and there's manufacturers ready to take off. So, this mix of incentivizing production through customs duty reductions and some input goods, and encouraging local manufacturing through protecting finished goods, it's narrow, it's sectoral. So, here you got a few winners and losers, I would say, but not this all-on rush in terms of all the sectors that you see, from production-linked incentive programs or sectors that are announced in Make in India. So it felt a little more narrow, either in terms of protections or incentivizing, the import of input goods than I might have expected at this point in time. It's not really a political issue. It should have been fairly safe and comfortable, but a few sectors were targeted, not really the entire economy.
Right. We've run out of time, but thank you very much, Rick Rosso and Alexander Slater, for joining us with your observations on the Indian budget. Let's see how the government implements this and how the consultation on the regulatory regime, different policies, happens in the days to come. Thanks once again for being with us. We're going to take a short break here on Global Eye, but coming up, India and the United States have agreed to significantly elevate their initiative on critical and emerging technologies. A special discussion with former diplomat Arun Singh when we return. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and US NSA Jake Sullivan held a crucial meeting in Washington, D.C. earlier this week and agreed to significantly elevate the India-U.S. initiative on critical and emerging technologies. Both sides have agreed to expand collaboration in AI, quantum technologies and advanced wireless, joint development and production in defense, with an initial focus on jointly producing jet engines, enhancing collaboration on semiconductor supply chains and advancing cooperation on research and development in 5G and 6G were the key takeaways from this meeting. We also hear that the Prime Minister is set to make a state visit to the United States this summer at the invitation of US President Joe Biden. Let me go across to former Indian Ambassador to the United States, Arun Singh. Ambassador Singh, thank you very much for joining us. Very clearly, the trade deal has been off the table, but do you think this collaboration in critical and emerging technologies replaces the trade deal in one way and boosts economic and technology partnership between the two countries?
Parikshit, I don't think it replaces the trade deal, because the trade deal has its own place. But I think it can serve to build newer areas of cooperation and technology partnerships between the two countries. Now, talking of the trade deal, as you know, the trade establishments in both countries have been in conversation now for several years. And earlier, we did hear the talk of trying to do a mini trade deal. But even that has been difficult to work out, perhaps because of existing interests on both sides. What each side wanted, the other was not in a position to give on that. But at the same time, from what I can see in the public domain, there is amicable and deep conversation on trade between the two countries. So that has one dimension. But looking at the issue of critical and emerging technologies, if I assess the comments that have come from both sides and the statements that have been issued, there was a sense that while there is growing strategic convergence between India and the US, and they are doing more and more together in different areas, the economic and technological dimension of the partnership needed further strengthening. Second, everybody says that there is a perfect storm of technology coming with AI, quantum, cyber, 6G, private sector, space, commercialization of space, biotech, semiconductors. And these are going to completely transform the way we live, the way we work. Now, if India is to remain in the lead among the countries in the world and lose out again in terms of technology opportunity, it would be useful for India to place some emphasis in these areas and partner with other countries, including leading countries in the world with this technology. So I think those have been some of the considerations behind seeking this partnership. Also, in all countries in the world, including in the US and in India, work in these areas at an initial stage. You don't as yet have established patterns of production, established interests, or established norms and standards. So if you can start by cooperating at the initial stage, you can then work together to develop norms and standards that also work for India. And once you've had the initial cooperation, you then move into a production cooperation arrangement. Then you can look at what kind of trading arrangement that work for both of you. So you can then do away with some of the challenges that you faced at the moment. Again, this is an area where it is not enough for just the government to play a role. But academia and the private sector will also have a role to play, because in several of these areas, the research is only at the academic level. And industry is trying to partner with academia to find out what can be translated into industrial production. So that was the reason, I think, why on 30th January itself, a day before the National Security Advisors had their formal conversation, both of them, along with the U.S. Commerce Secretary, interacted with a large meeting where there was a presence of U.S. and Indian industry and academia to signal to them that they would like to encourage cooperation between Indian and U.S. industry in this area. And I think the final point that was important is that because these are cutting-edge areas, there would be concern, including in U.S. industry and academia, whether the government will bless this kind of cooperation. Because otherwise, at a later stage, they might worry that the government would step in and say that these are very sensitive areas of cooperation and should not partner with another country. So therefore, a message coming right in the beginning from the National Security Councils, the National Security Advisors of both the countries, that this is an area of cooperation where they feel that US and India are partners that from their national security perspective, they would encourage. So given all that, I think it's an important meeting, an important message that has been given. And again, if you recall, one major step in India-U.S.
Ambassador Singh, if I may ask you about the Defense Industrial Cooperation Roadmap. Yeah, if I may ask you about the Defense Industrial Cooperation Roadmap, both sides have spoken about developing a new bilateral partnership there, joint production, production of jet engines as well. How significant is this in our growing defense partnership? We've seen a series of operationalization of agreements happen since 2014. How important is this aspect now?
So defense cooperation is certainly a growing area of cooperation between India and the US. Now, till 2008, when we had done the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with the US, India had hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. By now, we have contracted to buy more than $20 billion worth of defense supplies from the US. Now, if you look at, for example, military exercises, the US does more military exercises with India than with any other country outside NATO. And India does more military exercises with the US than with any other country. And you have Army exercises, Navy exercises, Air Force exercises, tri-services exercises, Special Forces exercises. So you're building capability and capacity with that. And also India has done a series of what are called foundational agreements in terms of logistics support, communication security, in terms of sharing geospatial information. So defense cooperation potential is certainly building up, but where it has been lagging so far in terms of partnership in defense technology. And I think a message is sought to be sent through this meeting, and a reference there with the potential for partnership, not yet formalized, because clearance is still awaited from the US, potential for partnership in jet engine technology. If that goes through, then certainly it will take the defense technology partnership to another level. But the very fact that the US has signaled that they have received an application and they will try and process it on an expedited basis is an important message, but I hope they are able to allow that cooperation to go ahead. If they do it, it will be important.
Right. Ambassador Singh, the other big question, both sides have called this the next big thing in India-US ties. President Biden, while describing this meeting, has said that this will pave the way for democratizing technology, the technology environment. Tell us how this is important, how this agreement on critical and emerging technologies with India is important for the United States right now.
So first, if you look at the bilateral relationship aspect, we did this next steps in strategic partnership with the U.S. in 2004, and which was the first major agreement done after our nuclear test in 1998 and the sanctions that the U.S. had imposed on India in 1998. That statement on next steps allowed us to start cooperation in nuclear areas, in space, in defense. And it led to the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with the US in 2008, which opened up access for India in higher technology in the US and leading to the, as I mentioned, nearly $20 billion worth of defense purchases from the US. Now, as far as the US is concerned, today they see China as their main threat, economic, technological, and military. And they have said that China is a pacing challenge for them. That's the challenge they're trying to meet. Now, if they are to meet the technology challenge from China, which has a population of 1.4 billion people, to scale up in terms of human resource capability, the US needs another partner. And India, with a country, again, of about 1.4 billion people, which has shown strength in human technical capability. If you look at the US, number of H-1B visa holders from India, people working in tech industries, CEOs of leading companies in the US of Indian origin, a large amount of R&D work being done in India for US companies. So they see India as a country that has the potential for being a partner for the US, which would be useful for the US for itself in meeting the China challenge. So that's the advantage from their point of view. And of course, from India's point of view, this kind of cooperation will enable us to leverage partnership in higher technology areas where work is also starting in India, and it will be of benefit to India.
Right. We've run out of time, but thank you very much, Ambassador Arun Singh, for putting that visit in perspective for our viewers. And let's see what happens when Prime Minister Modi visits the United States to meet President Joe Biden. And we will perhaps see the operationalization of some of the steps mentioned in the joint statement by both sides. Thank you very much for joining us. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.